Richard Carpenter has always been the quiet one. While Karen stood in the center, her smile and voice were perfect. Richard was right behind her, writing, planning, and keeping an eye on her. He thought that because there was a secret he's kept for more than 40 years behind the music and the carefully made image of America's golden duo. He had a secret that he never told anyone until now. Richard Carpenter is no longer just the live-in half of a pair at age 78. He is the only one who knows the truth about something that almost killed him. He's finally ready to tell the truth. What really went down with Karen Carpenter, and why no one saw it coming. And that one time Richard says he'll never forgive himself for it. Everything we thought we knew is different now. Before she became famous, making gold records, and front-page news, Karen was just making music with her sister in a small California house. She was shy and tomboyish, nothing like the polished star the world would later love. And Richard was the quiet one who tried to be perfect. As a group, they weren't just brothers. They worked well together. They were one of those rare pairs that could understand each other without talking. Richard used to say that they were like telepaths when they were kids. She knew right away where to play a note if he played it. If she stumbled, he made changes. She waited for him to fight. It was never said. It was what it was. Richard always said that Karen was funny, silly, and very skilled in interviews. I had happy memories, but there was something more serious behind them. Feeling that something wasn't quite right even back then. She didn't eat much. She was very private, and when people were worried about her, she would often smile and wave them off. At the time, not even Richard thought it was a good idea. They had their eyes on the dream too much. By the late 1960s, Herb Alpert was interested in their harmony, and the Carpenters signed with A&M Records. People around the world had never heard of anything like that before. And Karen. People stopped what they were doing when they heard her words. Warm, sad, and pure. She could sing a line like she'd been through a breakup even when she was a teenager. She hadn't, though. Not yet. Still, she was just a girl from Downey, California. I'm still learning how to do interviews. Still learning how to fit into the mold that people have of her. And Richard was the one who planned it all out. He chose the songs, put them together, and managed the sound, but not because he wanted power. He did these things to protect her. It was hard to work in the business, especially for young women. Karen did not have the armor either. She was honest, kind, and terribly eager to please. Richard says he might have made her too beautiful, too polished, or too controlled in the past. The girl behind the voice that calmed everyone was slowly being erased. By 1970, the fact that they wanted to be close to you made them famous. Richard was 24 years old and Karen was 20. They were on top of the charts, getting Grammys and selling millions of records. But things were starting to break down behind closed doors. Karen didn't like the way she looked in magazine pictures. She was always worried about her weight, so she started going without meals on press trips, during rehearsals, and even while recording. Richard saw it. He did, of course. At the time, though, he blamed worry. They were so busy that they hardly had time to sleep. He had no idea it was something worse, something that would kill her one day. He says the guilt of not seeing it sooner never really went away. The Carpenters were seen as perfect by everyone. But for Richard, every #1 hit was slowly turning into a memory filled with sorrow. He doesn't just remember the music when he hears her voice now. He keeps in mind what they didn't say. Everything had changed because of fame. Not just their routine or the way they live, but Karen as well. Richard could see it, even if he didn't want to. That girl who would laugh at anything and eat peanut butter right out of the jar while they played piano together. She was running away. They were quieter, smaller, and more than just tired. He first said it was because he was too busy. Everyone was worn out. They had just come back from a very hard tour of Europe, and then spent months working in the studio. Karen had always kept to herself and been private. She may have just needed some space. She wasn't just making space, though. It was far away from everyone. She started recording singing by herself and asked to do takes over that Richard thought sounded great. She was always concerned with how she looked on album covers, TV shows, and even casual pictures taken backstage. Richard would tell her she was beautiful and sounded great. She would just smile and nod, but she wouldn't eat dinner that night. Then she passed out in the studio one day. They were about halfway through recording a sad, orchestral song. All morning, Karen's voice was shaking. She said it was just nerves, but Richard knew it was more than that. Richard rushed to her side when she fell down. She brushed it off. "Low blood sugar," she mumbled as she tried to stand up. She didn't want to see a doctor. She didn't want anyone to notice. But Richard could no longer ignore it. That night, he went home and played the piano. They played one of their first songs, but he couldn't finish it. The keys were fuzzy. He knew something had changed inside him, so the notes didn't feel right. It wasn't just about being tired. It wasn't fear. There was something Karen didn't say. She made him worry more the more she smiled. She had always been able to hide how much she hurt. That was the funny part. The same openness that made her sound so great to remember was the same weakness that made her pain seem invisible. And Richard was too close, too watchful, and couldn't see the red flags. He now says he saw it after all these years. He didn't believe it. She said she liked the way it looked when her clothes were too big for her. She would move things around on her plate and say she was full. Even though it was hot in California, she was always cold. The weight kept falling slowly and quietly until it was impossible not to see. Friends began to whisper. Their parents started to worry. Karen would change the subject, make a joke, or tell Richard to focus on the music whenever he brought it up. He did, because that was their escape. Things might get better if they could just finish the next record and tour. She might be fine. She wasn't okay, though. Richard began to think that he was the only one who hadn't seen it more quickly. He later said that during those years he had one big thought. The machine, the label, the press, and the demands should have all been stopped. But he was too. Daddy was his brother. He put together the show. He was meant to keep her safe. And somewhere between the quiet and the sound, he had failed. The whispers had turned into quiet worry by 1975. Karen was clearly going away. When she was in public, she still smiled, sang, and hit every note. But when she wasn't on stage, she barely ate or slept and talked about her weight all the time. She would step on the scale several times every day. The way she talked about her arms, hips, and face always made me feel sick. Still, she never said what it was. Richard didn't either. In the 1970s, no one talked about anorexia nervosa. There were no efforts to raise awareness or treatment centers. It was barely talked about, if at all, and most people got it wrong. Richard thought it looked like too much self-discipline, worry, and trying to be perfect. But he knew in his heart. That part of him that knew he couldn't do anything about it started to break him. At first, he tried to step in quietly and tell her to rest and eat. He even set up a few studio dates without her knowing, thinking that the alone time would help, but it didn't. Karen became grumpy, defensive, and remote. She said she was fine, and that everyone was being too dramatic. "I'm just trying to stay healthy," she'd say. Richard didn't try. He didn't want things to get worse. They had a new record being made. There was more and more pressure. The label was getting antsy. She had to look like Carpenter for them. No one ever said that out loud. Executives in the business were asking questions behind closed doors. Could Karen slim down a bit more? Could she wear something that looks better on her? They had no idea they were adding to a problem. They only wanted her to look a certain way. Karen heard everything too. Her fight wasn't just with her body. She had to fight against a level she could never reach. Things got so bad in 1976 that they broke. Richard barely knew who she was when he walked into a practice. Her face was sunken. Her arms looked like sticks. Her voice was still beautiful, but it was getting weaker and more easily broken. He moved her out of the way. Told her something wasn't right. She was told to stop. The first time, she didn't fight back. She got down and cried. She wasn't just upset. She was also sick of hiding, acting, and living up to a picture of herself that never really fit. She told him she had been trying to catch something in a life that seemed to be getting out of hand. The fame, the stress, and the traveling. Her work was sought after by many. Her wants were never asked for. Richard couldn't get over that talk for years. Even though she said she was in pain, she still didn't ask for help. She asked for time, room, and to be alone. Richard gave it to her. He put projects on hold and pushed back trips. It was already too late for him to change their plans to fit her healing. The disorder had taken over, and Karen, no matter how strong and smart she was, didn't think she was worth saving. In the end, Richard said that Karen's anorexia did more than just take away her body. It took away her voice, the real one. The one who told them what she wanted, what scared her, and what her dreams were. The Karen that everyone saw was only an act. The real Karen that Richard knew and loved was slowly going away in front of his eyes. Karen wasn't even close to being the same girl whose laugh used to light up a room by the early 1980s. She had become less talkative and more distant. Her body was too thin to be real. She also seemed to carefully divide her energy, which wasn't much, between practices and rest. Still, she smiled for the cameras and told everyone she was getting better. Richard, who was always positive, tried to believe her. There were times when things looked better, and it looked like she was coming back. In 1981, she started making an album by herself in New York. It was her chance to change, to break out of the image that had held her back for years, but the label put it on hold. He said it didn't sound enough like the Carpenters. She was broken by her choice. She was broken when she got back to California. Richard could tell that the fire in her eyes was going out. It wasn't enough that she spoke in her own voice and took a chance. That was the worst part of it all. Karen was dealing with more than one problem. She had to fight a business that always told her she had to be smaller, nicer, and quieter. They told her she was too much even in her last act of self-expression. Richard later said that after that, something in her broke. They worked hard and recorded more, but it wasn't the same. Karen was nice and helpful, but she seemed far away and unattached. Even though she was still singing, it looked like she had already left. She went to treatment on her own in late 1982. Ever positive, Richard thought this might be the moment when things would start to get better for her. Things got better for a while. She began to smile more, put on a little weight, and make plans. They even talked about new songs, projects, interviews, and maybe even going on tour again. But Richard couldn't get rid of the thought that it was too fragile. Not soon enough. He paid close attention to her and studied her emotions, posture, and quiet moments. He wanted to think she was getting better. But he knew in his heart that he was going to lose her. That fear came true on February 4, 1983. Karen passed out at her parents' house in Downey. It was too late by the time the rescuers got there. She was only 32 years old. Richard got the call as he was getting ready for a meeting. He wasn't sad. Not at first. He stood still in a quiet that he would later say was so loud it hurt his ears. And the tears wouldn't stop for hours after they started. His sister had died. She was his singing partner, and the one person who had been with him through all of his days as a musician. The sadness was too much to bear. But the guilt was even worse. He played back every second. Every time he looked away, didn't say anything, or told himself she was okay. After that, the months went by quickly. Lots of tributes came in. Everyone was sad about Karen Carpenter's death. But Richard, he wasn't seen. Not from other people, but from himself. Their songs would not play for him. I couldn't just walk into a room. The music that used to bring them together was now a reflection of everything he couldn't save. He couldn't even play the piano without seeing her face. The world moved on after Karen died. The hits kept playing on the radio. Magazines wrote honors. America's Sweethearts, the Golden Twins who captured a generation, were the subject of glowing TV specials. For Richard Carpenter, though, time stood still. It was too quiet in the room to stand. Each instrument had an empty sound. Every chord isn't finished. Now, the tunes they made together were too heavy for him to hold. At first, he pulled back into himself, not into retirement. He didn't wish to talk about Karen. Not at work, in public, or even with close friends. When people asked about her voice, her skills, or her memory, Richard heard what they weren't asking. There was no question about the pain, the pressure, the silence between them, or the fact that she would smile for the camera and cry when no one was looking. They didn't ask about feeling guilty. Nobody remembered him for his fame or money. Instead, they remembered his sister who needed help and his brother who didn't know how to give it in time. At some point, Richard started to talk again, but this time for her. He did interviews, put out archival projects, planned box sets, documentaries, and remastered songs, but not to make money. He did these things to protect her and make sure her story was told with respect. Because Karen wasn't just a voice to Richard. There was more to her than meets the eye. She had hopes, fears, and pain that only she knew about. He could also make sure that no one ever turned her into a tragedy if he couldn't save her. He kept all of her things, like her journals, notes, and emails. He let the public see parts of that collection over time. Not to show her off, but to make people remember what kind of person she was. They saw a girl on TV who was quiet and shy, but she was funny, smart, and had strong opinions. Richard also became a champion behind closed doors. Carefully and quietly, he backed causes that raised understanding about eating disorders. He didn't want anyone to notice him. He didn't want praise. He only wanted a few families to have to go through what they have. In an interview, he said, "Maybe we'd be having a very different conversation now if I had known than what I know now." Fans couldn't get over that quote because it wasn't exciting. It wasn't for their own benefit. It was honest. In a way honest no matter how many honors he put together or awards he accepted in Karen's name. Richard rarely gave himself time to be. The truth stayed the same. He would never fully forgive himself, and he didn't need help. He didn't want the attention. All he wanted was to remember his sister and keep the little things about her safe. The home movies were never shown to the public. They made her laugh, and she lit up when they worked out just right. That was his Karen. Richard has always felt her voice behind him, like a ghost, for the rest of his life. It wasn't scary or accusatory. It was just there, a quiet reflection of all they had built and lost, and all that still lingers in the silence. Richard Carpenter has a calmer life now. He still goes to the studio and plays music, but things are different now. More carefully and slowly. He's not after hits or trying to get back anything. He's just thinking about it. Richard, who is now 78 years old, has lived through the decades of sadness that were going to bury him. He has seen new generations fall in love with the Carpenters, heard performers cover Karen's songs on talent shows, and seen tributes to her on social media. He even put out a record with just piano music that was instrumental versions of the music he used to make with her. But Karen is still at the center of everything. extremes are not often used by him. He doesn't like sensationalism. He is careful with what he says, even when asked about the worst times in his life. Because Richard feels like opening a fragile treasure box when he talks about Karen. Every word could hurt someone or something. But he said something lately in one of the few interviews he did that caught everyone by surprise. He was asked by the reporter if he thought people finally knew what Karen had been through. If the world had finally learned what it had been missing. Richard took a moment to look down and say, "Not really. People still see the voice, not the price." That line said everything. Because Karen's death wasn't the only sad thing for Richard. It was that no one heard her death. No one paid much attention to what they were saying, but everyone knew the songs. Read through Rainy Days and Mondays and Goodbye to Love Again. Pay attention to how her voice changes not only from note to note, but also from feeling to feeling. She had been trying to tell us all along. Even after all these years, Richard is still trying to tell us that there was a person behind the voice, a sister behind the star. He says that the whole story was never told. At his house, there are still pictures of them laughing backstage before going on stage. He doesn't keep them out in the open or show them off to people. They're tucked away in corners and framed in a quiet way because some memories are too precious to share. And some sadness doesn't need to be talked about. It doesn't move. Karen's tale isn't just about being sick. There was a culture that expected perfection from someone who was too soft to live in that culture. Richard, he was in that world even though he didn't want to be. He was just nearby. He was the brother, the director, and the team member. He was near enough to see it fall apart, but not close enough to stop it. He has said before that he doesn't have a single moment or choice that he wishes he hadn't made. But everything that wasn't said bothers him. The times he didn't ask her how she was doing. The meals he didn't force her to eat. The ones he didn't break the silence. Because the things you don't say can be the biggest ones that people hear. That's how much Richard Carpenter has had to carry for 40 years. She loved him even though he was flawed, not because he let her down. These days, Karen Carpenter's music is still heard in every note, every word, and every empty spot between songs. That person knew her best and saw her as more than just a voice. They saw her as a sister who meant everything to them. Check out this for more news.